My guest today is a professor of organic chemistry at Cornell University. He's a self-professed libertarian and he's very vocal on many political and economic matters. We have followed each other for quite some time. I'm happy to welcome him to the show. Dave Collum, welcome. Welcome to Stansberry Research.
Yeah, this is an honor. I've had interactions with Stansberry, but not your podcast.
Yeah, well, welcome. And I'm going to try my best not to call you professor because I know you don't like that formality. And full disclosure, organic chem was the hardest subject for me in college.
You took it.
I tried it. I tried it. And then I went into journalism. And here I am today. So welcome, Dave. And I want to start by saying, for an organic chem professor, you're very vocal on economic matters and political matters. And I want to start with one of your recent tweets because you've really become popular on all social media platforms. You write, "Bulls beware. Biden's best equity play is to have the bubble blow up sooner rather than later. Blame Trump and hope to be rallying by 2023. Take our current mood and throw a 50% equity correction, credit collapse, and recession on top of it. That will be unsettling." Let's get your thoughts on what you would like to express more with that tweet, Dave.
Well, in some sense, that's a well-known phenomenon. There are plots out there on the internet showing the average equity return over the 4-year election cycle. And it turns out the first 2 years are flat. The second two are rising. And so you could say, well, that's just random noise, but it's conceivable that presidential candidates and administrations want the rally into the 4-year term ending and want to get reelected or want their party reelected. And so, Reagan had a rough couple of years and then it rallied in. And so do they control it? Is it just luck? I don't know, but I think they control it to some level.
So the question that everyone wants to know, or the answer to, is when does this bubble burst? How long can the Fed keep things afloat here, Dave, in your opinion?
Longer than I like. Those who think they can keep it afloat forever, I think, are delusional. It'll burst when it's ready. I don't. We learned from COVID, there's no proximate trigger effect. COVID would have blown the bubble up. Of course, $6 trillion later, they kept the bubble alive. But at some point, the bubble will just decide it's time to let go. And then I think the Fed has to step back and let things happen.
But do you think that the Fed had any other choice here in the current scenario?
They always have a choice. The problem is now they've got sort of a nuclear warhead they're trying to defuse. And I don't think they know how, but we've reached a point where it's diffuse it or die event. The whole problem started back when Greenspan became so narcissistic that he kept trying to prevent any pain from ever occurring. Greenspan put became clear, and then it became, the put of every other central banker since then. If they had let, raging fires rage a bit, and had given the highly leveraged speculators, the leverage in the system is unbelievable now. If they had let them know that they were on their own, if it turns down, the speculators would self-govern. They would hedge. They wouldn't take these kind of risks, or they would get slaughtered when they did. Now the current bubble is the most bizarre. And Grantham, finally, someone of prominence nailed it. Grantham said we're in the top couple percent valuations, which is undeniable, and we're in the bottom couple of percent economically. And that was before COVID. Before COVID hit, we were heading downhill pretty fast. This bubble is, unlike all predecessors, is based on a truly pathetic story. So the dot-com bubble was great. World's changing, the digital world's here, brave new world, everything's going to be great. The 29 bubble, same thing. The Japanese bubble, they were going to take over the world. It was a storyline that allowed the bubbles to inflate. This bubble is the Fed won't let it drop. That's a pathetically bad storyline. And history shows at some point they will literally step back and just let it go.
What are your assets of choice given the current financial environment?
It's the barbell strategy. So I have cash on one side and gold on the other. I I've been trying to figure out if there's some cheap assets that are more conventional. From 2001 over the next dozen years, I had energy, which worked really well. I got knocked out of it by my pension plan. They said, we don't want these plans anymore. And I didn't even know. A year later, I found out I hadn't owned energy. They saved me a lot of money because energy then got beat up. I think it's possible purchasing, the hard asset world, farmland, ag, energy, stuff like that might save you, but there's also a strong case to be made that when the selling starts, everything sinks. When the tide goes out, all boats sink, right?
What about cryptocurrencies? Do they have a place for you?
No, they don't. And it's not that I don't understand them. I understand something about them. I don't need both gold and crypto. And so for me, crypto's got the huge volatility that gold doesn't have. And I'm happy to have a good year be 20%. I don't need fivefold. And I don't want to have any fivefold down years either. And so I'm happy to sort of march my way up.
Dave, I'm interested, or I'm surprised to hear you say that in a way, because you're a big proponent of, freedom of speech, and Bitcoin enthusiasts, will use freedom to really describe Bitcoin and make the ultimate case for Bitcoin. So I'm a bit surprised that you haven't embraced it.
I've never believed they had the freedom they thought they had.
Let's talk about that.
Well, and again, I'm not alone. The hodlers, I'm in pretty good stead with the hodlers because I don't treat them like idiots, right? So
you're you're going on Max Kaiser's show.
Yeah, tomorrow, right? And I share their angst. I share their goals. What I don't share is their belief that the sovereign states can't touch them. I think sovereign states, to me, the big risk is, and someone got mad at this one. I said, I could see 100% correction in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I could see it just get wiped out. And there's all sorts of ways the sovereigns can do it, in my opinion. And no one has made a cogent argument that has told me they can't. Now, they don't think they can. And, there's the fist pumping hodlers who say, it's the beauty of Bitcoin. You can't touch us. I go, you make it illegal. You watch what happens to the price of Bitcoin. As soon as anyone of any serious repute can't own Bitcoin without breaking the law, it's a goner.
Look at the news coming out of the UK, right? Their regulatory body coming out, warning people not to touch Bitcoin, that they could lose everything. I thought that was interesting that they felt the need to put out that message. We saw HSBC, banning transactions involving Bitcoin. Is this just the start?
Tip of the spear, maybe, right? But see, the problem is if they did it without warning, then they would look particularly bad. Take, for example, the recent purges of free speech. It doesn't look good that people got whacked without warning. So I think the drumbeat will pick up and they'll start talking about Bitcoin being used by criminals and smugglers and you name it.
Right.
And it's sort of like the war on cash, right? Where they start talking about the importance of a digital currency so that cash can't be used to smuggle drugs. And once they decide to do it, there'll be some excuse. And then they'll say you can't do these transactions in Bitcoin. And then it becomes a black market currency, and it may not go to zero, but it's a very different world for the hodlers.
Dave, let's elaborate on this topic of freedom of speech. You've been very vocal about this. Hopefully we won't get deplatformed talking about it. You put out to the Twitter world. So if Twitter is a private company and can do whatever it wants, shouldn't every single business be open now?
Right. Well, that was an email I got, and it's not a perfect analogy, but it kind of got a lot of retweets, so people bought it, even if it's not perfect. The last couple of weeks have been really tough in the sense that it's clearly there's always been a war on social media against right-leaning people. And so if you look at the deplatforming of people on Twitter and defunding of people on YouTube, it's always been right-wingers. And so it's clearly a left-wing attack mechanism. It's a vehicle to put the bat to right-wingers. They kicked Ron Paul off yesterday without warning off Facebook. They kicked people are making a living with their YouTube accounts, and all of a sudden, boom, they're gone. And so that's bad. But then all of a sudden you find, for example, Gab is a free speech platform, and Visa cut them off from using credit cards as funding mechanisms. That to me is, I don't know, I'm not a legal scholar, but boy, I'd like to get my hands on the guy who did that.
Silencing people, deplatforming people. What will this lead to, Dave?
Civil war. Trump's an interesting case in point. Trump walked into a massive trap at the Capitol. I don't know who played what role, but boy, the amount of political movement that occurred in one day was phenomenal. So Twitter knocked 70,000 people off Twitter, knocked General Flynn, knocked Sidney Powell, knocked a bunch of the players off Twitter. The various platforms are doing the same. But now they're trying to take Trump down to zero. And I kind of understand. In fact, Jonah Goldberg made a good case for impeachment that I don't support, but I said, I have to think about Jonah's case.
Okay.
But to take Trump down a notch politically is different than total destruction. And there's 70 some odd million people who voted for him. And I think those people, some percentage will say, oh my God, I want nothing to do with them. But some other percentage are going to become pretty hateful. So I think to vanquish him at the level, it looks like they're going to try to vanquish him. Forget about whether he deserves it or not. I think there's going to be tens of millions of people who are going to be looking for a fight. And I think the lack of any restraint is going to polarize the right way more than they were leading into this mess.
One final thought. I know you put a lot of work into, you did a great segment on a 2020 year in review, and there's always, chatter about how 2020 is the worst year ever. Or is it? Could 2021 be even worse here, Dave?
Well, as I said in there, we weren't sleeping in the London tube hiding from the Luftwaffe, right? So 2020 was bad, but you got to put that in perspective.
Absolutely.
I think the damage of 2020 is yet to show up. So I think the utter destruction of the middle class is yet to fully register on people's radars. I think there's small businesses that are not yet gone, but will be gone, lots of them. And I think there's small businesses that might survive, but the savings of the owners of those small businesses have been wiped out because they've had to bridge this gigantic gap. So they burn their savings. And so I think there's damage done. It's like we're in the eye of the hurricane, in my opinion, economically.
Actually, I have one final thought. You teach organic chem, probably one of the hardest subjects on the planet.
It's actually not that hard.
For you.
No. I was
chair of the department at Cornell.
Like a language.
But for us normal folks like myself, for me, Daniela, one of the hardest subjects on the planet. Do you apply it in everyday life to help you navigate situations like the ones we're living in? Can you?
Oh yeah, it comes up all the time. If you actually look at the whole review, there's places in there where you can see things I learned from chemistry. Probably the most consequential thing I learned from being an organic chemist, I happen to be in a complex field that some people thought they understood and others thought you'd never understand it. So it was kind of polarized in that sense. And I got in there, and what I discovered is almost everything that anyone had ever accepted as fact turned out to be unfactual, to the point where the ridiculous levels of flawed. And then when we study it and we figure out what's happening, it makes total sense, but it wasn't what people said. And sometimes it was way, way off, way off. They weren't asking the right questions. So then the question is, well, how does that relate to finance economics? Well, I can look at 12 central bankers and say they could all be full of shit. They could all be dead wrong. And I have no trouble imagining that the 12, maybe they're the 12 smartest central bankers, they can still be wrong. I've seen it over and over and over in my world. Complex subject. Organic chemistry is nowhere near as complex as economics. So therefore, I think probably the central bankers are deluding themselves.
Fascinating. Dave, when you're teaching, do your classes ever go into politics or economics? Do you veer away from chem sometimes? Are your students interested? Well, I mean, you're a superstar on Twitter now, so they gotta be like.
that there's two answers to that question. One is in the past, the answer is, oh my gosh, yes. And all the time, and I tell great stories. I love campfire-like stories. And I used to use funny things my kids did as part of my class, and I get high marks for entertainment value. Now it's so dangerous that I'm teaching 2 courses in the spring. I have no idea what's going to happen. For all I know, I've got a classroom full of undergrads who are looking to get me. It's that crazy. And so, so will I be able to do that going forward? I think I can win them over and slowly but surely loosen up, but I have to start out really conservative but you can say one thing and find yourself hearing from the dean. And so I find it repugnant. I want to, what I would say to them is grow up, right? Quit being a bunch of candy asses. But I don't get to say that to them.
Well, you got to say it here, Dave. So
I have to say it here.
I appreciate your insights, and here's hoping to a good year for us all, Dave.
Yeah, you too. It'll be entertaining.
That's for sure. And thank you all for watching. We'll have much more for you on Stansberry Research. In the meantime, you can follow us on all our social media platforms. Thank you for watching. I'm Daniela Cambone.